So the myth is that the Mughals came into India as invaders and they brought Islam with them, and related to that, the idea that Islam spread through the sword, right? Now, that is so far from the reality of Islam that one doesn't know where to begin. But the overarching theme is that Islam was actually in India within a generation of the Prophet's death. It is possible that a companion of the Prophet, a Persian companion of the Prophet, Prophet Muhammad, traveled to India and built the first mosque in Kerala in 629 CE of the Common Era. This is the Cheramun Juma Mosque in what is today Kerala, as I mentioned. It's also, by the way, the case that Christianity came to India within a generation of the death of Christ. This is the Apostle Thomas, who was one of the 12 apostles. So he is known to be buried in India, along with people who may have been companions of the Prophet. It's not 100% sure that that story is true, but they were definitely Muslims in the south of India by the year 800 CE. Those people were not kings. They were traders, they were mystics, Sufis, and they converted thousands of people throughout the subcontinent. I mean, it started mostly in the port areas, so places near the Arabian Sea. So Gujarat and Kerala were two of the main places, but really it spread very quickly. So that's sort of among the common people, by 1,000 of the year 1,000 or the year 1,200, you have many, many thousands of Muslims, maybe hundreds of thousands of Muslims living in what's now India. Around that same time, you have the rise of Muslim dynasties. These are not, for the most part, some of them are founded by people who were not born in India, but these are you can't call them foreign dynasties. So I'm talking here about the Mamluks, which are also called the slave dynasty. I'm talking about the Khiljis, the Tughlaqs, and the Lodhis. So these were all Muslim dynasties, and many of them, by the way, were fighting against what we now would call the Mughals. At that time, they called them the Mongols. The Mughals aligned when they actually were able to invade successfully. They were only able to succeed through an alignment with Hindu kings, with Hindu Rajputs in Rajasthan in particular, to defeat the Muslim Lodhis. So you see, it's an alliance between Muslims and Hindus to defeat Muslims. It's not this idea of bringing a religious lens onto that and saying that it was Muslims fighting Hindus or whatever. It's a modern and artificial kind of a construct. Now, within this, we often talk about certain leaders. So Aurangzeb comes up as a particularly brutal leader, which he was. But there have been brutal leaders, before him and after him. Aurangzeb's biggest crimes, his most brutal crimes, were against his own family. He imprisoned his father, he killed his brothers, he killed his sister, he killed cousins. He destroyed 16 temples, according to the best account I could find. Although he built many more temples than were destroyed. He also destroyed at least one very prominent mosque. So it wasn't like he was destroying the symbols of one faith and leaving the others alone. He destroyed prominent mosques as well. And he also killed prominent Muslim leaders. So specifically a Dawoodi Muslim leader was killed, along with the Sikh Guru Tegh Bahadur. So these are some of the crimes of Aurangzeb, and I'm certainly not defending them. Aurangzeb was a pretty bad king, but so were many others, right? Ashoka is known as this kind of pacifistic almost king, which may have been the case very late in his life. But in the beginning of his reign, he was another very brutal king. Some of the stories, I don't have time to give a full history of Ashoka, but he is said to have cut off the heads of 500 of his own ministers. At one point, he was displeased with some of his wives and concubines, so he cut off the heads of 500 of his own wives. And then he hired someone who was an expert torturer and murderer to do future sort of tortures and murders for him. So the point is that kings have no religion, or if they have any religion, if they use religion, it's about control. Aurangzeb was a brutal king who happened to be Muslim. There are many tyrants of all religions, right? Kings and queens aside, the implication is Muslims converted by the sword, and there may be some truth to that. I mean, certainly it's possible that some people who are now Muslims in India, their ancestors were converted by the sword, but so what? If someone wants to convert to become a Hindu or a Buddhist, would they object? If someone is born in that tradition and wants to continue that tradition, they have the right to do so. The freedom of religion is a fundamental human right, as is recognized by the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. and by international law. So really this question about Islam spreading through the sword and so on, first of all, it's not accurate. But secondly, it's like, okay, it's not even relevant because we're talking about people who are alive today. We're talking about the choices that they make. So it's not relevant what may have happened in the past, or it's not so relevant. It's an interesting historical question, but it's not an excuse to oppress Muslims.